the same time, the EU has issued yet another stark warning about the ongoing humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip, saying that local humanitarian workers face the highest risks of being killed or injured while performing their duties to distribute and provide medical care. Now, this week, the first case of polio was diagnosed in Gaza in 25 years, a highly infectious disease that is often spread through sewage and contaminated water. And AIDS groups say that this is a result of the dire conditions that currently exist in the enclave. Well, joining us now is Arwa Damon. She's a former senior international correspondent with CNN who's currently in Gaza on behalf of her aid organization, Arwa, which provides mental health services to children who have been impacted by war. And our guest, Yaakov Lappin, military and security strategist, is going to be joining us as well for this conversation. Now, Arwa, you are in Gaza right now. Paint us a picture of what the humanitarian situation is like on the ground and what the biggest concerns are that are facing the Gazan public at this moment.
It's absolutely catastrophic. Imagine a minuscule space with, especially when it comes to what's happening in the south right now, well over 1.5, close to 2 million people in it who don't have access to hygiene products. So there's very little soap, shampoo, toilet paper, disinfectant, sanitary products, that sort of a thing. You walk around the various different makeshift camps and settlements that have been set up here, and people are begging. They are begging just for a bar of soap. I was at one of the hospitals earlier today because we also work with children who have sustained severe injuries. My charity does. And I went to the ICU with one of the doctors, and what he said was, in the hospital, you have to turn off your heart, but when we go home, we cry. And the reason why he was saying this is because there were at least 2 cases in this one particular ICU where there weren't basic supplies, and the children were suffering as a result of this. One of them was a 1.5-year-old girl whose entire family has been killed. If she actually wakes up, she will find herself orphaned. This little girl is not stabilizing because they don't have a proper pediatric-sized tracheotomy tube. There is a 13-year-old boy with 50% to 60% of his body burnt, 2nd to 3rd degree burns, but they don't have enough bandages to do regular bandage changes, and as such, his wounds became infected. He has a blood infection, and he's exhibiting signs of early sepsis. Even in the hospital, imagine this, the doctors are having to buy their own soap because it's not being provided to them. That is the soap that they're using to wash their hands between patients. Hygiene inside the hospitals is just about impossible. Even in the ICU, there are flies that are just landing on the children. I mean, it's a nightmare.
That's what I wanted to ask you about, is the humanitarian aid distribution. Obviously, we hear Israel saying that it stepped up the amount of aid that's making it into the Strip. We see social media videos coming out showing markets that seem to be fuller than they certainly were in past month. What is really happening on the ground? Where is this aid going that is making its way into the Gaza Strip?
Well, there's a big difference between what comes in as aid, which is what gets distributed to the population by humanitarian organizations, and what, for example, you find on the market. So yes, there are fruits and vegetables and chicken on the market, but no one has any money to actually be able to afford to buy it. And the prices are astronomical. To give you an idea, a bottle of off-brand shampoo that should cost a few dollars right now in Gaza costs $30. No one can afford this.
Why is that
no
the
one
case?
Can afford to buy chicken. Because there's the high prices are because of demand and lack of sufficient produce coming in, even though it is found, and people don't have money to buy it because ever since October 7th happened, most Gazans actually live on a day wage. No one has gotten their salary. Accessing your money in the bank is extraordinarily difficult. And as such, they're not able to buy everything that you're seeing in those videos on the market. So what we try to do as aid organizations is actually purchase and create these sort of fresh, produce packages to hand out. But we're not able to come anywhere close to meeting the demand that's out there. And what's interesting is that while, yes, you'll see a lot of fruits and vegetables, hygiene products are very difficult to find, and again, astronomically priced. And so it's this situation where, people aren't accessing, no matter what it is that you're seeing on the images, people are not accessing what they need.
What is Hamas's role in this at this point? Is there a Hamas presence? What have you been witnessing as to who is running things on the ground?
I have not seen Hamas, spoken to Hamas, interacted with Hamas, not this trip, not on the last 2 trips that I've been here. I have been to Gaza before October 7th, where obviously they did have a heavy presence. This situation right now is completely, totally, and utterly starkly different. You get the sense that this is a very lawless kind of land. There's absolutely no rule of law right now, and that is creating its own set of extreme challenges, both to humanitarian organizations, but for the population itself. A lot of people will tell you that they find the lack of rule of law extraordinarily unnerving, disturbing, and frightening. They do not want to continue to exist like this. They do want to see and are so desperate for some sort of a ceasefire. And the vast majority of people basically feel like they're just pawns in all of this that's happening right now. And they have absolutely no control or agency over their own lives.
Yaakov, I'd like to turn to you. We have you on Zoom as well. Obviously, we've been hearing Israel say that they've been stepping up the amount of aid that's going into the Strip. We've seen initiatives to take injured and sick children out of the Gaza Strip for treatment abroad. But obviously, the question is who is supposed to be in charge here in terms of kind of addressing these issues that we're seeing on the ground as a result of 10 months of ongoing fighting in Israel's targeted campaign against Hamas.
Right. Well, look, there's no question that Hamas has brought destruction and tragedy to the people of Gaza in a terrible way. And it's continuing to do that right now. I mean, it fired rockets from humanitarian shelters and schools and field hospitals in southern Gaza in recent days. And it doesn't get more cynical than that. Now, look, in terms of the stats, if you look at what COGAT, which is the coordinator of government activities in the territories on behalf of the state of Israel, is saying, since the start of the war, they've overseen the entry of almost 1 million tons of aid through 46,000 trucks. Now, about 80% of that is food. It also includes things like fuel and gas, tents, medical equipment, about 26,000 tons of medical equipment to be precise. There are food warehouses. Now, according to COGAT, the food warehouses in Gaza are fully stocked. Now, there is the problem of what happens to that aid once it enters the Gaza Strip. The problem is that Hamas seizes a chunk of that aid. It needs fuel to continue its offensive operations. It needs to feed its own terrorists. And then it monopolizes the rest of the aid that it gets hold of because it wants to secure its position as the civilian regime, the future civilian regime in Gaza. So Israel itself has yet to make clear how it intends to deal with that problem. It's not enough to bring aid into Gaza. There has to be a responsible distribution mechanism. Otherwise, it's going to end up on those markets where nobody can buy them, as we've just heard. It has to be distributed directly to civilians. Otherwise, it's just not going to get to them.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank both of you for joining us. Yeah, Arwa?
I just need to correct something because the aid that what you're seeing on the markets does not come in as aid. Those are commercial goods. Those are commercial trucks. That is what is filling up the markets. And I can also tell you right now that our warehouse and the other humanitarian organizations' warehouses are absolutely not full of food or any other supplies.
In this given moment, but we also did see a situation where there were warehouses, specifically, for example, the ones that were right near the U.S. port that was built that saw tons of food and different supplies just sitting there because of the inability to properly distribute that food, right? So, I mean, this has been an issue that we've been seeing throughout.
Right now, there are 550
Right, no, exactly.
trucks.
And there is this ongoing problem where, aid gets to a certain point, right? A pickup point, whether that's at the Kerem Shalom border crossing or what you're talking about that's at the port, where yes, aid organizations cannot go and safely and properly pick that aid up because of the lawlessness that exists along certain stretches of the road. That does provide a huge challenge to us when we're trying to navigate it. And there are many who would say that, it is Israel's responsibility to help us to secure that. And when it comes to what was at the port, a number of humanitarian organizations did actually attempt to go and access that aid and were denied access to it by Israel. And so what we end up with is a situation where, organizations like the World Food Program, that is highly capable of carrying out these kinds of distributions, are themselves as well unable to access these aid points. You need to understand the process that we go through to obtain these approvals for every single one of our movements that we want to conduct throughout Gaza.